Pat Clay and I attended a high school on the edge of Detroit, somewhere working-class parents sent their kids so they might not have to become trained fighters or 24-hour victims. Slight diversity of population won out against comparatively differential education. Ugly bureau attached to a church thrice its size. This glorified dentist's office, seating almost 200 pupils, maintained the curricular aptitude of the public schools we were trying to avoid, offering useless religion classes for compensation, forced recurrent tries at church attendance under the guise of discipline, and, with scant exception, likewise intermediate teachers hardly worth the protection money our diocese demanded of us. The visual element of girls in uniform was the sole benefit. We had auto mechanic and auto factory cum engineer boomer parents who dreamed in vain of their millennials obtaining any future. Despite everything, Clay and I happened upon a pearls before swine genius English teacher, inspiring, unlike the movies, 3 students a year tops to fail at words, boot camping the rest through an elegant and forgotten system of grammar, before being forced into early retirement when the school closed and sold its name to the highest bidder. Boomer guilt of selling out in the 80s, hippies were left an economy to revolt against in the first place, influenced a major debate in literature. Formal elegance once warred against informal elegance, long before Love Life Diary plain Jane activist for the people prose came to prominence. Gen Xers, the nomad generation, according to Strauss and Howe, disillusioned by the hapless revolution preceding them, nevertheless carried over this unfounded fear of poserdom. Granted, there may still have been something at risk to sell then, the fabled soul perhaps. There was a cold-as-ice, anti-lovey-dovey, benumbed coolness introduced, mean and wild, now in its death throes. Nihilistic lack of self-esteem encouraged against the upswing of a yuppie happiness-seeking post-drug idiot self-help industry passed from slacker loser coolness into downright millennial emasculation. Another failed experiment, another theory in a half-shell. Participation trophies where the dick went, boomer wave 2, no fun drugs or art to show for it this time. Just zombie pills and drollness on a page, static pawns, and a fourth protocol woke advertising campaign, a hyper-socialized, false sense of security parental pet, born of a new toxoplasmatic left wing infected by its own feces. Yet we were old enough, a few early 80s births on the precipice of these cultural operations, to mate psychedelic dropout irreverence with cruel nihilistic deadpan, before the auto-narcissist millennial transcript droned forth, the revenge of minimalism. Frank Strunk taught high school for 30 years. A member of the silent generation, he began his civic duties before wasting them on us as a freedom rider activist protesting Southern segregation. On the trip down, a sheriff's cruiser backed abruptly onto the road, sideswiping his car full of Yankees. Upon waking, they were instructed to leave town and walked bloody many miles to the nearest bus station to complete their demonstration. Years later, Strunk, standing 6'5", berated a rookie cop for shining a flashlight in his eyes. The ticket was forgotten. In the late 70s and early 80s, loose cannon character actors David Patrick Kelly and Tom Sizemore attended Strunk's class. Some percentage of his persona feels spliced into their more imposing roles. He engaged in theatrical bouts of violence to quiet the class. Almost no one got hurt, the implication being enough. Desks overturned with the flick of a wrist. Keys shot across the room, denting the wall. Doors were punched asunder. Silence ensued. An obtainable yet sophisticated breakdown of Stephen Watkins Clark and the Reed-Kellogg sentence diagram was then laid out, alongside classical studies of Shakespeare and Poe. His Detroit audience, myself included, struggled dimly to understand. A rare and outdated type of Catholic, he believed true morality might be discovered in the perfection of one's craft, through an Olympic amount of formal training, applied accordingly, via every competing intellectual source, until a refined individual emerged. If you chose to strain yourself beyond capacity, sacrificing contentment, merit and virtue became one and the same. An elitist fear of elitism killed off his kind. Strunk taught you John Gardner if you took a liking to the subject. He'd met the man, James Dickey, as well. They were part of his rough-and-tumble generation, back when the debate in literature involved quality in either direction, before the syllables were trimmed back. The Gardner and Glass rivalry, syllogism versus rhetoric, came at a time when you could pick one side without hating the other. Gardner believed glistering alive prose still too stilted without an innate message hammered under it. To address an issue, not necessarily to form an answer, but to communicate using the tool of language tuned to its highest expression, form being part of that expression, words like tools to dig a hole, something there to chew on, the application in itself a moral solution, this was Strunk's doctrine. The structure was elite only in practice, not due to the complexities of obscurity, but through application of skill. Gardner thought the middle-class domestication of literature dulled these tools. He also thought Meredist abstract experimentalists an ungodly waste of talent. He knew art was not a testable certainty and so could debate gas with noble openness. He said people who want to blow up the universe always end up blowing up themselves. His novel Grendel mocks Sartre so well it replaces Sartre's plain philosophy with a darker art. Strunk taught The Wall alongside Grendel. The Wall did just okay. William Gass's linguistic sculptures were concerned with the beauty of juxtaposition. He transformed language in the opposite direction of communicability to disarm it. When you assert a message, this is what confuses. The medium itself must be tricked into doing far better than you, as a clear-headed person, can do. Fiction is not a good method for solving issues, Gass said. Leave moral matters to philosophers. Any proposition can be twisted on purpose. The tool of communication in all forms leads to unintentional twisting, beliefs held in suspension. The level of meaning should be more than you are consciously capable of understanding, or the book will be as thin as you are thick. The sublime not knowing of finding the words. Both men were ascetics for their craft, and Strunk taught them as such. Stumbling upon the beats, much to Strunk's patient dismay, Pat Clay and I tried our hands at verse. Clay had a natural talent that far exceeded mine. The words flowed with adjectival symbolism and animal music, the subjective idea expressed through extravagant analogies, natural yet chaotic, primordial yet refined, a language-first lyricism, painterly syllables, audacious composures. We, from our own studies into Burroughs, Kerouac, and Ginsberg, reverse-engineered the whole of French literature without knowing exactly what it was, and attempted to layer our mess with Strunk's excellent formal analyses, coming away like first-year pataphysicians, suggesting demented theories, finding the brightest ways to swear. After automatic writing in the age of manifestos tamped symbolist advances down, the beats intoned a funkier, more lyrical combination of these techniques, from which we could intuit their precursors by accident, without the benefit of much literary availability from understocked stores. We engaged in Menippean satire, unaware of that word. Strunk did cover Swift. Crude assemblages of Bakhtin's Rabelaisian carnivalesque, mocking another authority figure, teacher, through effigy, Strunk's opposite, a terminal dementia patient, our Ubu, allowed to half-assedly lead every peripheral shit class possible by her green candle. Her tragedy might have been worth empathy if the arbitrary grading techniques hadn't delayed my entry into any number of college. Perhaps I owe her a thank you, then, to say the least. The book Clay and I and a few friends wrote with this dangerous imbecile as its subject, our Elfet Jari puppet, on stationery stolen from her desk, was directly inspired by the Nazi-sploitation film Salo. We even stumbled over Discordianism, inventing our own frivolous religions, and committed pre-flarfpoetry.com prank submissions, using just our puttering brains as the stochastic chaos engine. Clay and I embarked on an epic walk to Strunk's house, having driven him home once when his car stalled, trying to remember the location by strafing 4-mile-long grids of neighborhood, guessing nonsensical street names in encrypted rhyme, retracing the drive from school midnight to morning. When we found the nighted home, speech would have been an aftermath. The insane tributary gesture was enough. Dummy mission fulfilled. Standing up, our muscles atrophied, and we limped away another 4 miles back to the party we'd left, collapsing in uncontrollable laughter. Writing is a dead performance resurrected through the writer's epitaph, a heat-sinking eulogy brought to life with embalming fluid, a seance that eats its ghosts. We were lucky to find this out the hard way. Same chokehold we're born into, same mask fastened round the jugular, huffing Diet Cola for life, carbonated vein. Like Rimbaud, Pat Clay abandoned writing in his teens to help the world cough itself up via presence alone. Dedicated tryhard that I am, I've safe-kept his writing these years. The early works, circa 2000 and 2001, never before published, premiering now, read by the author, peppered throughout our interview, including excerpts from the dread Barbara Harper papers. I give you a very special Shucks About Everything, Episode 6, Pat Clay.
Hold back and become bitter, envious, lactating tongues digging deep found shelter in the warmest reaching of nirvana. My feelings swell, holding on to forever. In the moment lucid, and white smiles grin in mirrors turned back, breathing youth's hands like forever, appeasing infinity as a price. The hall's dark and subtle, as turns waving lights bent and living, reverting blessings, and became baptized in her ambrosia sin. Closing my eyes, opened my mind, and found love lives depth deep, never again a whisper. Took a little while, never is, remembered once, now bliss. Open-ended worlds felt wet, happened upon once in my life. Smells like happiness, face down, in the dirt we all have. When you care, tempting lifeless, encumbered in my arms, so warm and trusting, sought eyes vulnerable back in. Everyone's mother is a sloppy cunt, wrinkled, foul, hollowed bitch whose prosthetic words far exceed her willingness to offend with potent odor. Here I am, again, slowly drowning in what beauty summer's radiant glow, sun, showers sprinkle in droplets and shattered on cement tombs. In slow slumber I wait, in the frost of midnight shadows cumbering the cornered rays of light. To the sound of my sister's moan I masturbate quietly in the closet. Through dark perverted holes and through dark perverted minds all is welcome. I watched her go for hours, hand over hell, over silent scream, over the world tonight, and once over the moon. When this is over, I think I'll call Steve. It's the end of the world on borrowed time. Incest thievery marched slowly within mankind. A world so hollow and void of life, the decency of religion now turned to a knife, and a doubt of shower falls in beaded sweat. Of a newborn tear kept my pillow wet. A sorrow of distance she has thrust between. My world and hers is where I bleed. At midnight of tonight cumber no more, as I doubt our love evermore. On the forfeit of this last day, on the summer smiles fraught with sadness, disarray, and sharp seductive notes, smoking in the night's air, on a wall sat. Tomorrow, believing another day will come again. Racist me blue, fingering the intellectual cunt of society. I can smile now, I can breathe again. Now these fucking days of days of days, on end, till the end where tomorrow left hindering, on the brinkless insanity, sporting life. Jesus fucking Christ. Lift the fucking toilet seat when you're done. Believe me, sir. I know.
Strunk taught us with an old school classic style of grammatical know-how that predates, I think, the Strunk and White, no relation to Strunk and White, early 1900s grammar book that's taught everywhere. And it's a very simple, minimalistic guide to language that eschews a lot of the more complex, elegant language of the 1800s, right? Saying don't be wordy, don't play with words, don't use adjectives or adverbs. This kind of propaganda of the plain.
Don't use language.
Yeah, it's kind of what it's saying. The one guy is, the White is the guy that wrote Charlotte's Web.
Oh, okay.
Strunk is William Strunk, not,
He's really into singing pigs.
Funny that they have the same name.
Allegedly.
He used the Kellogg system from the 1800s, which is branching sentences.
Oh, we used to draw it out on the board, yes. And they would take like a little line and bring it off, and then write something else on.
Trees and the sentence structure. It's the subject and then the predicate and
or
the
object.
The predicate would be
and rape as you understood.
Yeah.
I don't like what we're reading.
Hamlet was boilerplate for seniors in a lot of high schools, but he taught it.
You understood everything.
He would break it down, yeah. And
simplistically, he'd just stop. Okay, what are they saying, you know? And everybody's just like, I don't have a fucking clue.
This is a Catholic school, and his discipline of keeping the class quiet involved extreme acts of
violence.
Yeah, flipping desks. There was a big hole where he punched his fist through the door next to a student's head for intimidation.
It was a rapturous type of rage.
Yeah, it was rapturous. he was a holy man. First of all, he was 6'5", bald, kind of like the judge.
Yeah, would always take off his glasses and rub his eyes, and then you knew something was coming.
Yeah, exasperated and frustrated.
Get up, close the door, lock it so nobody could come in.
That's the spirit, Rucker-Hauer sarcasm mixed with direct threat. Shouting down the classroom for its noise, not really single anyone out unless they were provoking.
But then acknowledging for the rebellious spirit. Psychologically broken, like good cop, bad cop at the same time.
He didn't deserve to be at a small Catholic high school at the edge of Detroit. He should have been teaching as a professor at a big Jesuit college.
High school, you're there because you have to be there. Fucking barely studied any language.
Neither of us were, and most people there too were Detroit kids. We weren't particularly literate.
When I went to go to that school, I had to do the, I think everybody did, but I had to do the interview with, what would it be, like an assistant dean? But I had to go and do this interview with him, and they're kind of like looking over my grades and everything. He's like, well, do you even know how to break down a sentence? And I was like, I think so. I had no fucking clue. And he's just like writes it out, and he's like, what's this? They still let me in because they needed the money, but fuck, man. With my education, I had no clue. I could read words, but I had no understanding of how they work together or why they work together. Illiterate to that point. I was going into high school.
Yeah, me too.
You ever find that moment of your life when you finally realize you're retarded and you should be collecting money from this government the whole time?
The SSI.
I'm practically disabled.
Oh, shit. I still am struggling with that.
It's high school and I learned to read. Welcome to Detroit.
He by force got us literate to some extent.
When it came to Strunk, he basically got to the point with me to where I forget what I wrote the first time. Some joke thing or some poem, and I don't even remember. But he actually graded me on what I wrote. Pretty much just told me, he's like, if you write stuff, he's like, I'll grade it for you. And that's basically what he started doing for me. I didn't necessarily have to follow a curriculum, but whatever I found joy in doing, and he kind of seen that, and he nurtured more towards that when it came to how I started off writing. One of the most amazing turning points in my life was a teacher that understood beyond what a book was and what they had to do. Everything else, you had to do what was there. He would correct me, show me my grammatical errors, my use of things. Started to learn how to write that way.
This is a time when Columbine is encouraging all kinds of snitchery and all kinds of censorship as far as if the content of a student's writing, right? And so I was reading Desaad, and he, being a Catholic, he didn't approve necessarily, but he encouraged my preoccupation with violent sexual imagery. And
we're like Sister Pat wouldn't have did that.
No. There was a nun in the earlier years of the high school that was okay, but not particularly open-minded about certain things, right?
No, not like the hot nuns either.
But in a time when teachers would hand over their students if they wrote anything fucked up, especially with guns, which we were all doing. We were all writing about shooting something up. We fit the profile for that after Columbine.
Because of the Columbine, you remember that me and Devin actually got called into the office?
Oh, yeah, what happened with that?
He called us in and he asked us, like, are you okay? It's like anybody fucking with you type of thing. And he's like, you're not going to do anything crazy, are you? You know, basically like you don't know how to build bombs. You don't have any background in high explosives, or you don't have the anarchist cookbook. It's like, well, yeah, we do. But
yeah, we got it.
We all got it.
Yeah, we had it. What a lazy, in retrospect, I mean, what a shitty, and we got to consider too, the fact that they made the pretense of interviewing students coming into that school when they had a teacher like Barbara Harper, who of the Barbara Harper papers, who was utterly senile, the Biden of her classroom, couldn't run the classroom at
my
all.
God.
Wore a diaper to class. Completely dying on the stage.
Remember, she would just grade at random?
Oh, yeah.
Like, I did nothing in the class and got a B.
Yeah, and I kind of worked at her class and got a D.
I still don't know how that worked. I literally did jack shit in it. I don't even think I put real answers on paperwork and gave it to her and still got a B.
I did a field research thing for one of her classes. Did a 10-page paper on it because it was about movies, so I was into it. But then I got really into it, and I did a presentation where I brought movie scenes in, and it was a whole thing, and she gave me a D. I worked really hard, and I was very... Yeah, holy shit.
She always smelled like piss.
Yeah, she
was out of her mind.
She not in control of her bladder.
As the years progressed, she
was falling apart by her senior year. Completely mumbling.
Some sort of dementia, I don't know, was coming on.
Taught maybe 7 classes.
Oh, yeah, she taught the computer class. I would just be surprised to get a class and be like, what are you doing here?
Yeah.
Did you just wander in?
GTA during... Top-down GTA.
Oh, yeah. The old school GTAs.
Yeah.
I think we had Doom. Somebody had Tomb Raider on one of the computers. Got the password to her computer. So we would just go in there and download the homework before we were done, change the name on it, and then save it and give it to her on our floppy disk.
Fucking hilarious.
And we'd all just get all of our work done within 10 seconds. Yeah. It was so stupid.
Yeah, complete incompetent. There was so much chaos in every class of hers. People wandering in and out, students ignoring her.
Yeah.
And one time, me and Ed just went to the store in the middle of her discussion. She looks like she might have resembled Faye Dunaway 80 years ago, and then someone slowly melted her.
Her head reminded me of Barbie's little sister. Like if a kid got a hold of it and like chopped half the red hair out and just left the other matted and kind of spun up.
A shock of dying red hair.
You know, she wasn't red and she was losing her hair, so it was really sparse,
frayed,
and curly. It was like somebody dyed a tumbleweed and glued it onto an old...
Smashed someone's wax-covered face into a tumbleweed. Kicked her in the crotch so she couldn't control her hips anymore. Completely sloshing.
You could hear it crinkle when she moved.
Yeah, the diaper would crinkle. Complete skull dough on a skull.
Mm-hmm.
Just withered.
That's nightmare fuel.
There was a lesson
or fapping material. You know which side of the fence you want.
It was a lesson in mortality.
That's why I wanted to die young.
She inspired a lot.
Yeah.
But then, by contrast, we had maybe one of the greatest teachers, certainly in Michigan, Strunk, for English. Luckily, she didn't teach any fucking...
I don't think she could.
Yeah, she taught these asinine, more contemporary subjects like sociology and psychology, real bullshit.
Yeah.
And
it's basically like the study hall of scholastics.
Yeah, it was like a less disciplined study hall. And so,
today we're going to color bunnies.
Yeah. She would say, no. She was very confused. Try to dole out punishment entirely arbitrarily. One time in her class, I was reprimanded for not facing the right direction during prayer.
She would try to send us to the office, and we would just go to the bathroom. Yeah. And she'd forget. Yeah. You'd come back. Where you been? Are you my son?
Her retirement home was to teach several classes. And the rest of the teachers were okay and fairly middling. It was not a scholastically amazing school aside from Strunk. Strunk was the only exceptional person as far as the faculty. Inspiring, a wild wit, mean-spirited wit, not for sadistic reason.
He's like that bastard with a heart of gold and a twinkle in his eye. It was such a weird but yet alluring mix of a person. Not just somebody up there reading and preaching from a textbook.
Yeah, you could tell his faith allowed him not to become dead to the job that he had.
Oh, as much as he liked to tell us about you ungrateful bastard.
Yeah, right. The keys would come firing over our heads. He was maybe 59, for his age especially, and he could fire the keys like a baseball, 100 miles an hour over everyone's head, very accurately, and never strike anybody, but come very close.
And he had a lot of keys.
Yeah.
That was a big ring.
Yeah, it was a big ring of very sharp, old-school keys.
Mm-hmm.
And
I think he filed some of them into shivs.
Yeah, they might have been shivved
just
up.
in his spare time at lunch.
Right.
Dreaming of one day just taking a kid out in the hallway.
Yeah. You could tell he thought about that. I mean, he punched that door. I mean, the door was, the closet door was bashed in.
It'd have been great if Barbara Harper had just wandered in behind the door and he put his fist through it and just all you heard was like, oh!
she turned to dust.
Opened it up and there's just a wrinkled face mess looking like a deflated football with blood dripping down it.
So we took a liking to him because we knew he was fucked up and had a fucked up sensibility and a dark humor. We gave him a ride home a couple times. We knew where he lived. The one time we showed up at his house.
One big walk we took.
Yeah.
I believe we just went by his house, but we didn't go to it.
It was real early in the morning.
Yeah, but there was another time that I don't remember what time of day it was. I think it was more towards the evening. And we went there and we actually knocked on the door. Wife answered, or maybe she was there.
Yeah.
And he said it was nice to see you guys, but, get the fuck off my property or whatever and don't come back to my house type thing.
Yeah, I'll kick your ass.
And we kind of laughed it off and he laughed too, but
he kind of meant it. But it was funny. It was also really funny. He had a lot of style. He had a lot of...
What's that, gumption?
Yeah, a lot of gumption, a lot of layers, and also juxtaposition, paradoxical kind of guy that doesn't exist anymore. Kind of teacher that doesn't exist anymore. Not quite all the way in the Whiplash style or the Gordon Lish style, but not as high level sadistic as that, but almost, and definitely things that wouldn't pass muster now in the sensitive times we're in.
God, no.
No, but it was amazing and it worked and it was fantastic and it was necessary considering the situation.
All the things that they miss now because they're just too frail,
he built an appreciation for language and for from an institution that normally you would never bureaucratic. Dead-eyed. Yeah. I mean, they've given up. Even the kind of good ones have given up.
So much I have found for not having my feelings spared.
George Carlin, smartass, pulling things apart, pulling apart the institution that you're even in that paid him.
I just don't meet anybody like that really anymore.
Oh, they're all dead. There was a few.
Everybody's just so flat most of the time.
Yeah.
They abide by their stereotype. They set out to be a certain type of person.
There were a couple Strunkian college guys I met, that they were old, his age. Mm-hmm. There was a type of guy, they were the silent generation. They weren't boomers, they were, I like these in-between generations. They're kind of darker, kind of don't give a fuck about a lot of the dumber social mores. There was no bullshit to his class. We were spoiled to have someone of that high of a quality. It could have been a 100% useless education going there.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, yeah. It really could have been.
He saved it from that.
God, he would have hated it now.
Oh my God, I'm so glad. He died right at the perfect time. Yeah. He died perfectly right before the world went to shit with political correct. It's 2013 to now.
The death of art.
Yeah, he died right before the death of art. It's fantastic.
He took it with him.
Yeah. Some of the college guys I mentioned also died right before this shit got really bad, and I was very glad for them. They're lucky.
Yeah, they have to ride it out.
Yeah, right. Glad they didn't have to see. They would have died just looking at this shit now.
More than sometimes, the glittered ocean tides bide, killing freeform angels for fret. Gothic apathy, slow wilting hands hold sand, withered time, reposes, distress, amongst people that cried, died and became all, but now sympathetic hands still climb high, hanging heavens not true. Misery's spread legs beckon wide, smiling and arrogant with love-powdered blue evidence of a 1970s romance novel dating discotheque soldiers of the dance floor. Chewing pennies behind the front store counter blindfolded, wet and confused. Masters of my fate cracked with delight. Smoking rasp, left-handed lighter brigade, impressed with a 21-finger salute. Assaulted Negro shadow men, bound gagged, slept in the absence of life, riot. Shielded yells, stuttered gunfire, cleared gray brick county buildings, smearing bled aesthetics limbs into the sewer. Jeremy, a tall teen of 16, died the summer of 1995. was that 2001?
Yeah, 2000, 2001.
We could have already been born and gone all the way through high school again by this time, you know?
Right? Yeah.
That's what's so crazy. 20 years.
We'd be all the softer for it if we had gone through now. There'd be no Strunk at all. There'd be only... we had the Columbine scare, but there was a little flattering, And I was a little insulted they didn't call me into the... You know what I mean? For that.
Dangerfield inside the classroom.
I get no acknowledgement over here. I could shoot this place up any day. I would hand him shit about killing people. Pretty weak language-wise. To say I can read the most absurd series of arbitrary titles that are completely inappropriate and weirdly sexual, whereas all of your stuff holds up because you had the Rimbaud more advanced. The feel of words, the sonic quality over the meaning, right?
Words would have a certain amount of meaning to them. They would have to have that feeling in them. To me, it would have to match. It was more or less trying to paint with words. The sound quality of them, the way they cut together, they have their meanings, but I also go through in a lot of thesaurus, a lot of dictionary. I would go through a lot of words, almost like trying to find different colors. Something that matched, that fit. Things sometimes didn't work, and I would have to putting them together, hyphenating them. It's trying to get that abstract of emotion out into the words. The same way I would do is I would use lines to draw pictures because I did a lot of fine line work. Trying to translate between the two. You could write and then go back and toil over a sentence for a while. Well, I would do kind of the same to an extent, trying to get specifically almost line for line at some points to make it match the inflection of it.
Musical thing more than something trying to be signified or communicated, right? It was something expressed.
Yeah, it was more of an expressive thing. Because like I said, I never learned language.
We had some very good basic training, but that sticks in your head only for a certain while because it's sort of like math, right? But then you take that and you build off of it into the musicality of it, which he impressed on us very well.
Yeah.
And then we had the beats to finish that, the lyric qualities for us.
Some stuff like E.E. Cummings and things like that. It was almost more of an art form than it was a literate thing.
Right.
It's
playful.
Yeah, and it's, to me, like, I found a lot of beauty in that. For me, there was no way, like, I'm going to come in and compete with anything. It's like somebody from a different sport coming into another and, thinking they're going to, win.
It's all losing with literature either way.
I guess so, yeah. Well, that's what I kind of learned, too, that it's the same as music. There's only so many chords. It's just how you put them together.
Right.
And with writing, there's only so many words. It's just how you put them together, how to utilize them. And you go from, the smallest details is like how you're drawing, and it builds to a bigger picture. I think it's kind of what I learned, too, over time was going from my little 4-line stanzas or whatever the fuck, building them into bigger pieces and, putting them together with other things and really seeing that thought in my mind come to fruition through a much larger and more beautiful piece. It was a good feeling at that point to be able to articulate that. Even when I learned music, it was you start off chord for chord, note for note, build your way through it. Same with drawing, build that memory within my body. The writing was more of a cerebral thing. An emotional conveyance, because when you're younger, you got the hormones flowing, the imagery kind of in your head.
Rendering, creating the palette for that, regardless of rhetorical rules.
But yeah, because it's language. It's such like a dead thing. And trying to convey anything is hard. It's harder than regular art. When you can invoke stuff through writing, and that's what I found with like a lot of the beatnik stuff was like I actually felt it, when I would read it. And to other stuff, I would read. I didn't really feel anything from it. It was just more of stories. It wasn't cookie cutter stuff that you get from, everybody else that's basically just trying to turn a profit. If you're just strictly in it for the profit, then you're kind of probably not your thing.
There's a lot of careerism today in literature.
That's about all it is now.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Yeah, it's all it is now. Almost. Yeah, it's all real safe.
They'll throw you a cookie.
Yeah, there's a lot of safe shit going on. We backwards engineered ourselves without even knowing what symbolism was through that movement. But what we did eventually come to is backwards engineering ourselves into Alfred Jerry by taking Barbara Harper's, the inept, tyrannical skeleton woman, taking her notepad and writing a mocking narrative diary for her called the Barbara Harper Papers. Highly X-rated.
I remember those were more of a joking thing, too. When I came to writing anything on it, it wasn't anything I took, like, my other stuff seriously. It was more of a very fun...
It was a big, exquisite corpse. Everybody contributed.
Yeah.
Very jocular. Our 5 or so group of friends were freed by Strunk in a way to write on very odd topics. We put that to effect in the Barbara Harper paper, which were not handed in. They were way too much, even for Strunk. And also they were written on a stolen pad of hers, which is...
Yeah, stolen stationery from the teacher's desk.
Yeah, with her name embroidered on it.
Yeah.
And which I still have, but the...
and her medication schedule.
Yeah, her doctor's visit. Her hospice fucking stuff. But
hospice.
Hardly any of those hold up except for yours. Ours were, because you had a better sense of humor and were using your palette to a much higher effect. And everybody else were more obviously jocular and more derivative of jokes.
From the desk of Barbara Harper, page 16. Dear W.K. Anus, I have found friendship in a waterlogged sand crab who seems to match my IQ point for point. Although, Buddy, the crab seems to have better motor skills than I. Mid-noon. By now, the Bobo and inbound crabs have picked my moist, sweaty cunt blood and boils in the bright orange fireball I call Bobo. I am dehydrated, so for the last hour I have removed my tattered panties and wrung the sweat out in my parched throat. This day will end soon, and I must eat my newfound friend to survive. Don't fear, Bobo will be with me until he goes to sleep. From the desk of Barbara Harper, page 17. Dear Jesus, I've now found the salt water brings on hallucinations more so than my panty water. It's hard for me to walk, and I have to drag my old weathered breast across the seductive sand. The more I travel, the closer I come to orgasm. I can't wait to finish. My nipples are starting to bleed. I lick the blood off and rub it on my crotch to keep moist. My clit is starting to get sandburn. Have to go, oh my God. From the desk of Barbara Harper, page 20. Dear Penis, I have yet to see the light of Bobo. My many days back at the camp have become a blurred reconciliation of horrid blue smurfs that poke and prod me so violently. I fell in love yesterday with the most beautiful fence post. The shimmering glistened in the midnight surrender. My love, my heart is all but shared by the many metal connectors of my true beauty. From now on, my feet will sink deeper, much as my aged skin deeper, much as my aged heart has in the mud of my desperation. My Bobo, my morning, such sorrows I find in hearing the birds chirp. Farewell, freedom, harps. So it should be like, Dear W.K. Anus. No.
The practice of that, what Alfred Jarry did, he had a fat, tyrannical teacher, him and his friends in school, made a puppet show where the teacher was called Ubu, and they would put on a play of him just being grotesque and inept and farting and shitting himself and saying crazy shit. And then he wrote this into a play when he was older, and the play was a huge sensation because it was the first play in France where the guy comes out on stage and he's in his gross fat costume and his first word is shit, and everybody freaked out and they tried to run him out of town. One of the first rock stars of literature that existed before, but it's the beginning of the 20th century's turn into your darker artist.
Barely had any web pages. People would exchange web pages like they were drug deals.
Yeah.
They'd slide you a piece of paper with a web address on it, like, check this place out.
And it would just be some guy who assembled some information about the Beats. I knew a Beat website, but I mean, that wasn't reliable information necessarily. Sometimes it was.
Yeah, there were no fact-checking or anything, no Wikipedia. There was no Google.
So I might have heard of French poetry, but I didn't know a lot. I probably heard of Rimbaud through the Beats, through books where the Beats mentioned him, but I had only seen a little bit.
Yeah, we would still go to bookstores.
We'd have to go. You'd have to find, and I would find shitty translation of Rimbaud, whatever standard thing they had at Barnes & Noble, and it wouldn't be a good representation of him at all. I didn't get a hold of it, find out what it was until last 10 years, and a lot of it coincides with what we were up to, just in general, because it's very youthful.
It's almost like a natural thing. The absurd, abstract way of thinking has its own conduit of hashing itself out over time.
I think so. I think it's always been there.
And it's just you arrive at certain points, and because we were so far along in history that it just happened at a certain progression, and we had arrived at where we were.
I want us to be the next iteration of that, but I mean, everything is so fractured now, and there's so many people, and there's just no one cares about that stuff now, so it doesn't really...
Hardly anything memorable.
This is a contemporary issue.
It was almost void of any type of emotion.
This is fucking edgy in the most NPR way possible.
What the fuck is going on out there? Tear the heavens from the sky to indulge earth's appetite. Dim sweat that light evades in each eye's silent sanity. Mothered under knives, I gaze on graves, walking one fortune at a time. Tear-starved livelihoods, sentenced to heaven, broken glass behind the clouds, blue within midnight diseases, the moon screaming, bleed yourself. The cult killers I grew up on, Mother Mary of the third kind. Alone with the light, slow roar emptiness, follow faded months, red-haired rivals, angel beauty adrift, brimstone pressed into shadow, flaccid petals twinkle, unjustifiable rapture, poised in scent. Distilled choirs, dust-stung dreams, timid union, carpeted corpses, burnt into family portraits, still on asphalt, composed nudes, sirens' hues, the length of misery, dying breath in silhouettes. Blessed cannibals ravaging sweet teens, innocence, recompense raughtless, driven heroin, boarding veins, paint thinner sport fumes, profit lobotomy swollen humors. Landed on the hot dog vendor's cart, blood never felt so warm. Blankets of laughter as I die with no pants. The dark becomes her hair, sunshine in ruins, slain down to a voice. All the stars of diamonds stolen, all the rain of Sunday mornings mourning. All of you for one more day. Spoken love wastes time. Now in death I miss you more. I stroll black licorice streets, becoming ice inside your spine, till the sweet psalms kill. Open wounds, wide-legged thrills, salty wages, bludgeoned roses, rashes pound for pound, anti-tank rounds. Distort the reaper, take my hate. When I am an article of your affection, drawn to your feet by death, when the sounds are void of voice, and a life of scorn draws in, when the words left dead at dawn drip from choice, and you greet your sickest fawn, tell me I am wrong.
John Bonnell stood in a crowd of one outside Macomb Community College's administrative building, holding a placard favoring free speech. To add to his sardonic revelry or masochism, he'd gagged himself with duct tape, caught along his beard, likely having to scrape the glue out. He made himself a daily fixture, all bondaged up with zero support, no motivation beyond his fucking career being stolen over nothing. Bureaucratically suffocated in the sphincter of an institute, catering more and more to the idiot whim of students they'd suckered with predatory loans, into believing whatever nonsense made a passing grade happen the easiest. Bonnell had the audacity to dive into the English language balls first, with inspirational passion obsolete both to the corporation and to the future retail workers, pranked with a degree, Generation Retail. He'd authored a vicious faux apology, a satire of the young lady who cost him his job for swearing in class, not angrily, but to underline a language lesson, and snuck it online to a GeoCities site in 1998 AD. It was a time when complaints about the insanity of his firing garnered enough news attention to get him reinstated, not canceled. I was 19, a big George Carlin fan, another early killer of PC culture before it swooped back and Obi-Wan Kenobi'd us all, and Bonnell was the closest thing to having Carlin for an English professor. Bonnell was in full victory mode, reinstated by force to quell media attention. No one in the class that semester turned snitch. He talked his glorious mean talk. He even patronized a silly poetry open mic I hosted. An unstable poet is bad for anyone's cause. Notwithstanding, Bonnell read a beautiful poem about cleaning his mother's stoma on her deathbed. A year later, the first of many cycling political correctness revenge schedules had him suspended again. Now the Bonnells are all dead and their false accusers live on, trending heartily. I give you Shucks About Everything, Episode 7. John Bonnell and the most important essay of the 21st century. An apology. Yes, Virginia, there is a sanity clause. By John Bonnell. Young lady, before identifying the clause in the title, and as a preface to the apology you desire, let me review the 2 articles of impeachment which you have preferred against me. First, there's the 1 count of butt-fucking. Second, there are 3 counts of blow-job. The first charge, all by itself, I must confess, would inspire squeals of protest even from the most asinine, the most cheeky. The second charge, on the face of it, is more than your average mouthful. I marvel at your courage in bringing notice of these alleged outrages to the proper authority, and I am amazed by the modest remedy you require. In short order, I was summoned before the college's highest tribunal, where the Grand Inquisitor himself, with the support of sundry assistants, subjected me to rigorous cross-examination. I was not informed beforehand as to the specifics of this interrogation, apparently because the examiners were after the truth of the matter and probably felt that the element of surprise would tend more profitably to that end. Professors are rather like politicians. Give them ample time to consider any question, they are apt to expatiate ad nauseum. I did know, because of your, quote, formal complaint, unquote, what the fundamental charge might be, sexual harassment. But, as that might be anything from gang rape by a bunch of Hell's Angels to an indiscreet plucking at one's own wedgie, I couldn't imagine what witches' spew might be brewing. Consider, Virginia, the second article of impeachment first. Had you voiced your exception to blowjob in class, 2 things would have occurred. First, you would have been given credit for class participation according to our academic contract. Second, I would have reminded you of the orientation I announced on day 1. To wit, however idiosyncratic it may seem, I take all of the English language as my medium, or as an opportunity for scrutiny. I do not make, quote, political, unquote, or, quote, moral, unquote, or, quote, social, unquote, distinctions between one word, one phrase, and another. I will make note that others do when such notation is instructive. The only distinctions worthy of critical attention pertain to sense or meaning, and thus communication. On rare occasions, where 3 or more students have expressed common discomfort, I have acceded to such a significant minority. The intent, after all, is to teach, not to posture or proselytize. I leave the subjective categories of, quote, obscene, unquote, or, quote, profane, unquote, or, quote, vulgar, unquote, to goody-two-shoes and to the bizarrely schizoid courts. The latter understand that flag burning is legitimate symbolic expression, and that neo-Nazis and racial supremacists must be allowed to voice their hatred. Violence is as homespun as Oklahoma City and Waco. We know how, and have a will, to protect our own. Try making allusions to sexual or other bodily afflictions. Let's hear how you sound, buddy, with your tongue torn out. Furthermore, I probably would have pointed out that blowjob is a euphemism, and an absurd one at that. There have been blowjobs galore executed on campus nearly every day of this unseasonably mild autumn. Young men with gasoline-fueled engines strapped to their backs have repeatedly disrupted my daytime classes via the cacophonous blowjobs they administer to the reverberating quadrangle. Those who maladministrate this college apparently deem a tidy-maloo more critical than intramural discussion or lecture. Perhaps we should indict those responsible for, quote, environmental harassment, unquote, for perpetuating an aerial and auditory pollution far more egregious than any of my dynamic ejaculations. But there is little justice, Virginia, on this campus or in this world, only officious straining at gnats whilst camels hump through. Speaking of worldly injustice, I understand that my blowjobs were peculiarly reprehensible, mayhap even criminal, because they were allusions to the spectacular entanglements of a William Jefferson Clinton and one Monica Lewinsky. What, the Grand Inquisitor wanted to know, could I possibly adduce to justify the discussion of political science in an English class? I have subsequently been informed by students that at least 2 of our math professors also entertained this topic during class time. Mirabile dictu. Yet, I must concede proliferation of crime does not absolve any isolated criminal. It says, after all, in the cover letter to the college's, quote, Revised Sexual Harassment Policy, unquote, July 30th, 1997, that, quote, regular use of profane, vulgar, or obscene speech in the classroom, which is not germane to course content, and thus educational purpose, as measured by professional standards, will lead to the imposition of discipline, unquote. But you see, Virginia, this sort of legalese is variantly known in the grown-up, advantageously sane world as bullshit. Profanity, vulgarity. I'm especially fond of this one since it ensnares virtually everyone in its aristo-analcratic web. Look it up, and you'll see what I mean. You will think, something ain't right here, and you'll be right and wrong altogether. And obscenity, this one's a doozy too. Quote, inciting lustful feelings, lewd, unquote, is the second definition. The other applications are reminiscent of, quote, vulgar, unquote. The only persons in my classes who are stirred, in any antisocial sense, by my diction are either the very unfortunately, quote, wired, unquote, on the one hand, or the very young Virginia on the other. All these are in the eye of the beholder. That's why even so august a body as the U.S. Supreme Court has continually tied itself into comical knots, trying to sort out the sordid, parse the putrid, and teat the taughter. That which is, quote, germane to course content, unquote, is best left to the professional. More on, quote, academic freedom, unquote, later. While, quote, imposition of discipline, unquote, is reserved for the amusement of inquisitors. Nevertheless, I was somewhat taken aback by this, quote, Germanity, unquote, and possibly failed to make the fullest explanation. That is, while the preponderance of my classroom time focuses on, quote, the analysis of the function of particular words, phrases, or images, unquote, that appear in our texts, I don't want my students mistakenly presuming that such analytical skill is germane only to literature. You may recall that we also examine statements offered in the, quote, media, unquote, or in other printed sources. For example, apropos the president and the intern, I probably commented on a CNN reporter's language early in September when she said, quote, the president was involved in another prickly face-off vis-a-vis the press this morning, unquote. I may well have pointed out that the cunning linguist who wrote this script failed to trip up the straight-faced journalist who had to deliver so slyly veiled an allusion to fellatio. James Joyce, who flourished in an era almost as neurotic as our own, and who was A consummate wordsmith enamored of pun and innuendo would have loved this broadcast moment. By the by, Virginia, you may be pleased to learn that fellatio is the preferred articulation of the Grand Inquisitor. He used this variant at least twice during cross-examination of my person. Fellatio, being Latin, is deader than Cleopatra's asp. When dragged into English dialogue, it constitutes a euphemism which does for communication what blurring does for lenses, what, quote, snow, unquote, does for TV, what static does for radio. As such, it reminds one of William Faulkner's character Snopes, who'd step on the gas pedal and the brake pedal at the same time, generating considerable noise but scant motion. I can recall my own mother posing ambiguities when she yelled at me, quote, "Don't touch that, that's caca," unquote. I couldn't tell if she was referring to the dog turd on my right, or the attractive E. coli-free but used condom on my left. Giving the latter a blowjob, I was thrilled at how rapidly and easily it filled. Years later, when she lay dying of colon cancer, I would irrigate her stoma betimes with my bare finger. It definitely was shit, but it wasn't caca. Wherever the Grand Inquisitor's pettifogging fellatio may have defied or tended, he might have been talking about sucking cock anyway, hard to say. I am sorry, Virginia, that you find your language, the English language, so painful. What about the other charge, that I committed one butt-fucking? I was invited to reconstruct the context for that one, that snappy trap, since it apparently didn't dovetail with the political, quote, digression, unquote. I'm depressed to admit I stumbled here, too. I was more fascinated by the collective inquisitors' scribbling in reaction to my affirmative, my admission, and, though I labored, I only vaguely remembered the circumstance. Now, however, I seem to recall that we, the class, were discussing the Greek word philia and its multiple manifestations in modern English. I believe we covered, quote, philosophy, unquote, love of wisdom, and, quote, Philadelphia, unquote, love of the Adelphoi, the brothers, and, quote, pedophile, unquote, quote, love, unquote, how absolutely absurd, we agreed, of children, and, finally, after several others, we wandered toward, quote, necrophilia, unquote, love of death, or, erotically, of the dead. Then, because I assume I am among adults who are students of life as well as of language, we talked about a notorious instance in Detroit some 15 years ago, wherein an Indian village gardener murdered his girlfriend, buried her body on the estate grounds, then dug it up 2 weeks later and fucked the corpse, because he was certain, quote, she, unquote, must have gotten lonely. To lighten things, after the gasps, no one regurgitated his or her supper on the floor, so I presumed some of the gaspers were emulating one of my traits, reveling in the histrionic. I used a Sam Kinison skit for comic relief. You know, the one where he imagines he's a corpse lying face down in a mortuary cooler, chilling out, congratulating himself for having fought the good fight. Noting the looming presence of what, the mortician? Why is he pulling Sam's phantoid's pants down? What, he's, oh, no! I miss Sam, the ex-reverend. Life can be such a pain in the ass. It takes comic genius to conjure. Is death also? I am sorry if you didn't appreciate my Semanthian. Don't look that up. It's a neologism. Same as phantoid before it. We're not supposed to indulge creative urges such as this unless we're famous, but hell, I'm pushing 60 and legitimate license is eluding my grasp. You know, Virginia, my very caring, very perceptive wife speculates that this is what flipped you out, that perhaps someone important to you had died not long before. Is that true? Literature and language, then, are my main concern. But analysis of same is not all I teach. Analysis is very important, but so is synthesis, the harmonizing of everything one is learning in formal situations such as the classroom, with everything else that one has discovered, with everything that one is becoming. As I often say, do you remember, the characters that you meet in novels and stories and dramas and poems are not specimens in a petri dish, remote, dissociated, unutterably alien. They are your kin. They are your reflection. They are you. The best artists are awesome gifts to us. Shakespeare, some say, is the finest psychologist who ever lived. Just so. And if you're not seeing your face in these mirrors, at least one of two things is true. You are not reading the literature very well, or, and this is far worse, you are not reading your own life very well. And there goes the Socratic challenge, his quintessential invitation, quote, to lead the unexamined life is not fit for a human being, unquote. That Socratic test prods us to make every effort to raise to the fullness of consciousness all the forces and influences that have formed us, whether in the narrow confines of family or the broader world of friends and fellow citizens. Everything, including linguistic prejudices we have learned, have found imprinted on our souls, is subject to review, regardless of source. Not the parent or the peer, not the preacher or the pedagogue who has altered us, is above scrutiny. Test all things, and only then hold fast to what seems true. We all start out as figments of others' imaginations, stuck with a cluster, usually contradictory, of derivative beliefs, values, opinions, biases, and, quote, knee-jerk, unquote, behavior. The more ancient a personal modifier, the more suspect it is. Quote, I have believed thus, and so all my life, unquote, exposes not some noble constancy, but rather the squawk of the parrot. Having, being, merely such a borrowed persona, the self is always vulnerable. Every alien idea, every weird or wild word shakes such selves to the prefabricated core. When we discuss, then, these masters' literary opera, that's a more charming plural, don't you agree, than opuses, which sound like a disease, a suppurating sore. Even dead Latin can sometimes afford us, the living, a chance to sing, a chance to play. You have observed that I often include personal anecdotes, illustrations from my own life, of Walter Mitty-esque incompetence, of, quote, open window, unquote, like coups laid upon stuffy adults, of little Chandler or Bob Doran-like sexual fear and sexual fumbling. For some reason, you only cited my, quote, sexual escapades, unquote. Weren't my non-sensual escapades interesting or memorable? I must try harder. When I recount such anecdotes, I, as is true of most fine teachers, am offering a species of, quote, modeling, unquote, practicing what I preach. See, student, this fictional jerk, buffoon, hypocrite, craven, etc., etc., that was, hopefully no longer is, your teacher. I essay to make it safe for you to see your face, too. And many do. I can summon in fond memory those who've said, quote, this is more like a class in psychology, unquote, or, quote, a class in philosophy, unquote, or, quote, a class in history, unquote, or, quote, a class in comparative religion, unquote, or a class in science, unquote, is what I wish someone someday will say. No one has, and the silence is eloquent, because I don't deserve better, but You know, well, only a very few could guess this is my darkest, deepest passion, to be a scientist. I expound on Shakespeare and Joyce, but I dream about Galileo and Einstein. Go figure. I never could, math being my vanquishing dragon. Consider the most intriguing, quote, definition, unquote, of humanity that I have ever heard. We are the process of the sun becoming conscious of itself. There, fellow Milky Way farer, is stuff enough to dream on for the Googleplex of lifetimes. I am so very sorry, Virginia, that you find my language, the English language, so painful. I am also sorry that you grossly misrepresented an important aspect of our classroom experience. You allege that I, quote, used my teacher position as a platform for authority to intimidate my students not to complain about me. Mr. Bonnell repeatedly made fun of students who had expressed offense or disgust, and he also laughed at them. This is one of the reasons why I did not come forward sooner, unquote. This reminds me of what David Shippers said to the other witch hunters in Congress today, December 10th, 1998, about Clinton, that his lies were worse than mere lies, quote, because they were half-truths, unquote. You make it seem that there were actual students that you witnessed actually being mocked or ridiculed by me. Paradoxically, this one of your allegations is the most obnoxious. To me, not to the majority of administrators who babble rhetoric about, quote, student needs, unquote, and yet give neither fig nor rat's derriere for real students' interests, except for the few who come sidling over with fashionable complaints. Because it is the one so alien to my nature, to my habits of respect and nurturance for people I know I am privileged to meet. It is true. This is your half of a truth, that I talked about previous hassles with the college administration over some students, quote, lining up, unquote, an obvious exaggeration for a comic effect, at some dean's office to complain about the, quote, bad man, unquote, with the, quote, potty mouth, unquote. And yes, a semester or more after the fact, I probably dismissed such folks, especially the cowards, the ones who never broached their disaffection in class, or at any time to my face, with a jibe or jeer, a hiss of derision. I tend to get a tad defensive when people don't just disagree with me, my values, my behavior, but who would also campaign for and delight in my utter destruction. Disagreement is fine. I welcome it, and always remember to reward it. The clash of ideas and values is usually both exciting and illuminating, but I have never, quote, dressed down, unquote, attacked, insulted, or ridiculed any actual student in any actual class. And you know that. And you know there can be no corroboration for your errant lie. Shame on you, Virginia, so very young and yet so devious. Much is made, at least, by the Grand Inquisitor and his ilk, about the power a teacher has, the power to grade, the power to humiliate. I cannot speak for my colleagues, but I know this is to be a grave distortion where I am concerned. Those few students who poise a knife at my back are, indeed, afraid of something, but it isn't I. What they fear is the wrath of their peers, their classmates, other human beings put at risk, betrayed by the craven treachery of one or, rarely, two. All their cowering behind the Inquisitor's hooded robe cannot conceal this truth. But, irony of ironies, because of the contract I made with you at the commencement of the term, and because you'd earned sufficient credit before demanding my head on a platter, I am morally obliged to record on your account a passing grade. It is as much my integrity and none of your terrorist tactics which prospers you. Again, Have actual students ever gotten uncomfortable in my classes? Certainly. I am not a, quote, postmodernist, unquote, a flaky, quote, relativist, unquote, who thinks any idea is just as wonderful as any other. I definitely do not respect lots of folks' beliefs, values, ideas, notions, prejudices, customs, but, curiously enough, I do respect the people. As Pope John the 23rd put it back in 1958, quote, "Error has no rights, but those who subscribe to the errors do," unquote. A horde of Catholics weren't happy back then with such a mealy-mouthed sentiment. They hankered for the consignment of all, quote, "them communist bastards and heretics," unquote, to eternal flames, at least. They would have gleefully done to their enemies, Virginia, what you would do to me now. The only defense people such as I have against people such as you is in your hands. My words. My language, my words, while broadly distinguishing between what I call, quote, the discourse of reason, unquote, and, quote, the discourse of passion, unquote, I take all language as my world, since the gradations between the antipodes are often so subtle. This very apologia, you will perhaps notice, has a bit of reason amid the rush of passion. Sieste moi. Sometimes in a classroom I become so enthused, and Theos, the god within, beware, beware his flashing eyes, his dancing hair, so animated, so caught up in extingent flow, the stream of words pours forth, like molten gold that hopefully heats and informs as it dazzles, or, at other times, tumbles and cools like a high waterfall. I'm also very modest. If I had to check this flow, constantly monitor its force or direction, I would have to become a radically different, a wholly diffident teacher. Sure, I can be, and often am, the calm pedagogue, precisely measuring out the cadences appropriate to pure reason. But if I had to be that always, a very important part of me would die. The only way the inquisitors of the world can ever ensure, quote, germaneness, unquote, good Germanness, is when all the classes are online. There will be no messy spontaneity then in their dreary dystopia. It's to avoid such death, to withhold, quote, the chilling effect, unquote, of self-censorship, that our culture has evolved the practice of, quote, academic freedom, unquote. This is not some bonus, some perk designed to comfort teachers, and its bestowal does not depend upon the pleasure of administrators or colleagues. It exists, rather, for the benefit of students, your colleagues, your peers. They require authentic, truthful guides, mentors, sources, to question, to push against, to grow with, and one day, hopefully, to rise far above. This can't happen with robots, with company men, with even the very best of good Germans. So then to conclude this, my apologia, I am sorry, almost ineffably sorry, that you find our language, the English language, so painful. You will never have the power, of course, to restrict it or to kill part of it as you wish. Nor am I possessed of the tongue of men and of angels, so as to protect it from you and all the tribe of its detractors. It will continue to wend its way, and may even find complete vindication one day from its shaky jurisprudential custodians. I will probably not see that day, as it lies somewhere beyond the frenetic millennial epoch, but you may. Hopefully by then, you will have learned to appreciate it. Maybe then you will understand that life without the fullness of your language's energy will be like that life Khalil Gibran says, languages without love. Life where you may still laugh, but not all of your laughter. Where you may still cry, but not all of your tears. Oh, the sanity clause. Virginia, I almost forgot. Here it is. Quote, Congress shall make no law, ... abridging the freedom of speech, ... unquote. This has driven the thought police, the language censors, and all deputy inquisitors beyond despair into madness. If I had access to your Christmas stocking, I would stuff it there. When, at length, you grow up, you will cherish it above every other gift, save love itself. Cheers. Another hidden gem on today's roster of the falsely accused, Ugis Pinka versus Students Online. How these types of mobs feign incomprehensibility in regard to language, excusing their lack of skill and or imagination, an illiterate trick of spurious catechumenates. Ugis Pinka taught creative writing at MOTOWN Community College during the same era as Bonnell. An equally gifted counterpart, more pearls before swine, whole oceans full. The great sculptor Jim Pallas taught at MOTOWN then too. That school had no idea what to do with the splendid talent it had employed against its will, and likely, along with most schools now, will never make that mistake again. Pinka's methods were wildly brilliant, unorthodox, yet always quite elegantly clear. They were effective techniques. Not that that mattered to the drooling student body sat before him, as we'll soon see. Selected comments concerning Ugis Pinka, still in operation, authored by an undisclosed collective of fools at RateMyProfessors.com, 2004 onward. Mean and picky. Totally off the wall and nuts, unclear and not very helpful, speaks a different language than the normal person.
This guy is wacko, so you have to be too. Tough teacher. You will never forget him. Not for the weak of heart or the thin-skinned. Lots of weird humor in class, but fun. If you really want to learn to write, take him. If not, don't.
This guy is a fruitcake, but tell you what, you will learn a lot.
The dude is a nut. He is really out there and not very clear on what kind of work he expects from you. He's fun, though, and likes to think of himself as a Yoda type with his wisdom. I would take him at least once, so you can see the freak show that is Pinka.
Just like everyone else said, this class is for people who like to think outside the box. But something was not right when after the third week the class size dropped from 32 to 12. Then by the withdrawal date, more people dropped and the class size was then 7. He was very mean and made me cry in class. If you're looking for someone that singles out one person, then he's your man, otherwise don't take him. It will be a waste of your money and not worth your time. One of the worst professors I've ever had. It's really sad that some people find meaning in their lives after having Pinka as a professor. He's always late, doesn't explain what he wants, and he never grades any papers until the end of the semester. I thought he liked a couple of my papers that he ended up giving me C's on. I ended up with a B+, but barely. He doesn't explain anything and will yell at you for asking questions. Don't take this class if you have feelings. You will cry. Frowny face. I think he's really hot for an old guy, but he is a meanie weenie. But I like it rough, but really he's not a good teacher. I think McComb should fire him. But I know they won't because he's just too damn hot. That's both. This professor was very hard to understand and didn't like to explain further than his notes. His papers were on crazy topics. I wouldn't take him again. He is really hard and he does not explain anything he does. I hate this teacher. He was completely disrespectful towards women. He referred to women as glass of water, completely transparent. After that comment, I immediately said something to him, which I should not have, because he had it out for me the rest of the semester. I should have went to the dean. He should be fired. He is cruel and too intense when it comes to commenting on your work. He actually brings tears to students' eyes and rips their papers in half and calls it garbage or junk. His methods are horrible. He favors students and puts down others. Do not take this class if you are sensitive or too nice. I didn't hear of one person who actually got an A. If you don't learn his methods to perfection, which he doesn't even explain well in the first place, you won't do well. He talked as if he were on an acid flashback during most class sessions. He would give clear assignments at one class,
Our next class he would forget what he said. He actually wrote a portion of my work to help me finish it. The next week he read the work and marked out his own writing. He's not quite there if you ask me. He is the worst teacher ever, does not explain, must grasp his methods and pro standards, otherwise you will fail, or at least mess up your GPA really bad. Doesn't help. Ask him if the paper is being structured properly. He says, I'm not going to write your bloody paper for you. Ask for an example. He'll say X is the subject. His attitude is arrogant. I paid to be taught, not to guess. If the paper has the format he wants, to know the errors, show me what to fix. The worst teacher you could ever have. Whatever you write on your paper, he says that's not good. This teacher seemed cool at first, but he sucks. I'm sorry. If you are a professor, you shouldn't still be favoring some students over others. I have always gotten A's in English and worked hours on my papers, and it never paid off. I felt like I didn't learn anything from him because he always had us in groups and basically we taught each other.
Horrible! The worst teacher ever! He doesn't teach, he clowns around all during class, gives the most ridiculous assignments ever and doesn't explain them well. He only favors white men and hates women and anyone who speaks English for their second language. He should be fired. Do not take him. Horrible teacher is more concerned with taking smoking breaks than teaching. Is more concerned with taking smoking breaks than teaching. He's the worst teacher I ever had. He doesn't explain nothing. The worst teacher I've ever had in my entire life. He's nonsensical. Don't ever take his class. All my papers said explain more, C+, no matter how much they changed. He rambles on and no one in the class ever knows what's going on. I hated this teacher. He didn't make any sense. I never understood what the assignment was, and neither did the people around me. He spent more time trying to be an interesting person than trying to teach us composition. The year I had him, he had an accent, but I've been told that this can change from year to year. He was the worst professor I've ever had. He is extremely judgmental. When you ask a question, he yells, "You have a book, use it." His papers are stupid and crazy. He is inconsiderate to any problems you have with the papers. I love English and have always aced English classes until him. The class started off 30 plus and ended up with 4 students. Pinka is a bit full of himself. He talks but doesn't listen. He gives instructions but he doesn't make sense. He criticizes but gives little encouragement. He grades papers better or worse depending on his mood. He took my writing passion and made it dry and restricted. I look forward to a better English professor for my next class. I got an A-. Mr. Pinka is a horrible teacher. I think Pinka has taught for several years and is beyond burned out. He needs to retire and stop acting like he's the best thing that walks on the face of the earth. I can say that 95% of my class had no idea what was going on. Run! Class has shrunk by nearly 70% first month. Students still attending are completely confused. Ask questions, get humiliated. Writing should not be about confusion. These poor kids are scared. He goes way too fast and scribbles on the board. Usually I only rate good teachers, but this time I was disrespected personally. Students, we have options.
Hello? Everyone in class is confused. If you ask questions, he doesn't answer them. He talks in circles and never gets to the point. He talks about death and dogs a lot. Everything that comes out of his mouth is negative. He's a funny teacher, but his lessons are confusing. No one in class understands what he is asking for and expects so much out of a class that isn't learning anything. And for some odd reason, he loves talking about dogs. Has a good idea of what he wants to teach, but doesn't know how to teach it. He shouldn't have been a teacher. No wonder why he went to graduate school and teaches community college. He's late for class most of the time, smoking his pipe. Doesn't actually answer questions, just kind of draws pictures and says hello and true a lot. One time he even spent half the class correcting papers. Just overall not a good teacher. He wasn't helpful at all. He doesn't really explain his work. We didn't really use the book, and he's rude at times. Pinka is a lonely, bitter old man. He is unavailable outside the classroom hours and does not even provide his email on the syllabus. He will make you redo entire papers without reading them, and his one-on-one sessions are a joke. He will spend 5 minutes with you and then not remember who you are the next day. Instead of teaching how to write a good paper, he taught how to write philosophical essays. Interesting dude. Hard to follow his train of thought. Grades pretty harsh. Glad I passed. I personally enjoyed this class because the subject matter is actually my major.
However, many students found the class difficult. Pinka is not helpful. He pushes you into taking initiative to teach yourself. He teaches how to think rather than write. If you are easily scared, do not take Pinka. He is also a tedious grader.
I don't know what this guy's talking about 90% of the time, but all I know is you don't understand what he is saying or writing, and you ask him to show an example, he will just call you stupid and refuse to give you an example. He needs to stop telling the class to wake up, and he needs to wake up himself and start teaching differently.
Nice guy. Knows what he's talking about, but the class doesn't. He talks like a crazy man, and he's so unclear. He mumbles, his board notes are chicken scratch, doesn't check our assignments, and gives difficult essays with unclear explanations of what we're supposed to be writing about. These papers would be thrown out in any other college course. Avoid this class at all costs.
First, let me say I am an avid writer who has done well in other English classes. This professor gave me a C- on a paper that I had proofread by my aunt, who has a master's in English. By far, this was the worst professor I have taken. Avoid at all costs.
He's very strict and particular about everything. He often confusing and make you figure things out yourself. I signed up to learn English comp, not critical thinking. He's a funny teacher, but he's teaching the wrong class. When this is done, I'll have learned everything but how to write an actual paper. Welcome to Shucks About Everything, a literary podcast with your host, John Kilpatrick. Episode 8, Cass Corridor Poets. Cass Corridor in the year 2004, pre-nipple-slipping Super Bowl gentrification, was a square grid of streets surrounding Cass Avenue that cut through the middle of downtown Detroit, revealing itself once one ventured west from the relative safety of the protected college area. Bars, usually overcrowded, became sparser. You had to be buzzed in. A punk venue slightly north, a cunt hair safer, awaited whites with modest self-concern. Otherwise, homeless smatterings of addicts stood hollering at their surrounding ruins, looking for someone just as lost to consume. These bars were hardly worth it. I had overcome my cracker-assed suburban fascination with such plight long ago, having grown up in the middle of it, a 7-mile reject. The dread recollection of war drum bass beats a ghetto can elicit in me is something I ordinarily skirt. My good friend of many years, Christopher Parks, currently dead, saw differently. A professional psychologist, never a couch jockey, he worked in Cass Corridor with these gibbering derelicts, a bona fide humanist, a complex breed of Gen Xer no longer in production, culled by death in our current Fey year for meaning well against all odds. We drank in excess and wandered his workplace. I, out of suicidal indifference and, being 20, a refusal to back out of any unnecessary challenge. He, because he wanted to make a difference, to help the helpless, in the name of some unspoken universality, and, by moderate extension, to befriend a cold and mean-spirited nihilist kid before his potential love of others fully dissipated. Spoilers, it did, and has since doubly fled, if it hadn't already evaporated long before. Parks was fresh off a divorce from a woman who asked him to stop writing. Side note, most of his surviving or unfinished writing has effectively, curiously vanished. His beat and Dharma-influenced poems surpass their influence with street-ready raw detail and quality turn of phrase, an enlightened hop from start to stop. He moved deep into the cast corridor to a crumbling motel. I armed myself more than usual during visits. We drank and practiced sketching lines in notebooks. He turned this into a group festivity, at which point I bailed and surrounded himself with young cunt, admirably workshopping them one way or another. His numbers were legendary. Me too'd before it was cool over a coworker's sext or a shitty student's hex. His outfit did the common cower of a firing, then had to hire him back due to everyone else's incompetence. Copious, pious notation from too many people he worked with in a church where his ashes sat growing humid proved to me their flaw regarding morality and human usage in a time before sex was illegal. He even fucked one of the over-gestated beloveds I held in a years-long Romeo shit fit without eliciting any generous ire from me. Humanists fuck. Nihilists mistakenly lock onto a supposed exception against the world we're so vehemently allergic to. Pity how poorly attended my nihilism stays, hypothetical and unpracticed, merely aesthetic, for love of art. A calling, no matter how disdained, divides one from typical millennial nothingness. But soon enough, with practice, please God, I'll stop producing altogether. The stance is just an innate response, formally polite, to underscore the temptation of homicide. Speaking of, we ran an open mic on Gratiot, a giant road snaking through Detroit, for 2 or 3 years before it became insufferable. Able to maintain an irreverent and archaic beat flavor because this coffee house was just outside the city, our clientele being terminally illiterate white trash bipolars as opposed to slam poets, we hosted fake debates in costume, shouting poetry in place of hot political takes. I brought in a skinned rabbit on a leash. Random dildo auctions occurred. Taking a cue from a genius high school teacher of mine, I suggested the audience protest us and made them zany signs. Enduring sub-amateur open mic poetry via second-hand smoke broke our brains and bodies. The participants were a level of stupid as unprecedented as their felt STDs. The malignantly passive-aggressive, effeminate male writer-scenester, grown vile from his own lack and aggressively obsessing over your own lack with latent homosexual petty sadism, came to own the era. In 2005, foretelling the coming death of art, a bouncy and traveling troupe of slam poets rapped about how the beats were all child molesters, which we'd considered a point of fascination, never an obstacle to their verse. I came inside an attractive suicidegirl.com who threatened my family when bored. She went on to beat drugs and to breed. It was still a better time than now, though that's not saying much in either direction. Retard Roseville closed its hut. Parks moved to Hamtramck. We drank at famous rockabilly punk bar, The Painted Lady, instead, giving up the in-vain performances, both continuing to write, also in vain. We completed a sci-fi novella together. Parks had an oeuvre planned out, an epic poem told in graphic novel format where many icons of screen and page meet in a bar and duke it out, starring Eastwood's Man with No Name as some Zen demon murdering everybody to staccato verse. He was going to branch into genre fiction, writing literary westerns, a lengthy short story about a woman snagged and ripped apart under a barbed wire fence while trying to escape the Holocaust. He sketched a play in which a skinhead, having stomped a black poet of note, came to read the man's stolen works and change his tune. Reams of notebooks laid it out, all lost. From the hospitable South, Parks gifted me fine drinks and expensive cigars. Back when I had half my health, a few of his poems remain online from the magazines I goaded him to submit to. His life had merit, and so did his work, partially because he didn't waste it toiling lines and submitting them nonstop to folded nowheres like I did. Partially because he didn't discuss empathy for points to match this shit-blathering epic. He simply put empathy into practice daily, something I don't recommend in either regard. Hell wins from every height. Doesn't mean we can't summon our own myth. Cowboys by Christopher Parks in Fanzine magazine. There are men who shoot the corners off their orgasm just to be right. There was a time when the hominids chose to build a house, the strip between each nostril. I am only here when I weep, rush my flesh to meet any boundary. When some women smile, it makes me want to be a piston into their happy head. I am entrance and all are occupied. Here is my grapefruit smile. Here are my hands creeping, my cortex framed. Blood will not exist. Blood will not be seen. I love you, says the target. I will jump on God when he stops to take a shit. Tell him, lift me by my cervix if you can, because I don't want to be hospitalized again. What we did here don't deserve satellites around it. I am salivating the doctrine of my amygdala. That's the acid that eats wishes. I choke on friends just doing the dishes. There is a philosophy behind every fistula. Christopher Parks in Rattle Magazine. Do you have the poem? Do you have the river poem? Do you have the ditch poem? Do you have the one with the trenches? Do you have the poem about the puddles? The one about the waters? The one that flows back and forth to find its own level? Do you have the one that tells about the deep hole? The poem about the hollowed out well? Do you have the poem about the mass graves and the dirt pushed aside? Do you have your ocean poem? Do you have the one that leaves me drenched? Do you have the poem that fills my lungs with fluid, the one that I dive into? Do you have the poem that I fall into? Do you have the poem that buries me? Do you have my death poem? Christopher Parks. I picture him in a petri dish in the collagist. I picture him in a petri dish, miracles contained within glass. I see him small, minute, dividing again, and yet again, a bacteria crucified. I know him moving beneath me, inside me, spreading across my skin with words that multiply endlessly. Interviewed about the poem. My life has been dominated by religious and spiritual ideas. I was raised in a strict fundamentalist household where we went to church at least 3 days a week. My mother read Pilgrim's Progress to me when I was 7 and acted out the part. The concept of Christ infects me. Though I have moved far away from the religiosity of my younger life, those ideas of spirituality being both inside and out, both personal and universal, permeate my work. A need for clarity is the myth of dogma. Language is a means to transmit ideas, and in transmission we shouldn't concern ourselves with controlling the concept on the other end. When we try to compact such concepts within a small boundary, the petri dish, we are in essence killing the idea. The true idea of Christ or Buddha or any other figure invades us, multiplies, and grows in ways we can never understand. The mystic movements in any religion refuse any demands of clarity. They understand the need for infection. I am currently working on a play. It starts with an accidental shooting in a deer blind and progresses from there. Essentially, it is about the ways in which men fail women. The transition from poetry to drama is difficult. I've attempted it before. This idea seems to be carrying me along to some destination. Christopher Parks, Ellie Mae Magazine. You have to be aware of the punctuation. Go swimming at high tide. You have to be careful of the undertow. Maybe you should not go swimming at high tide. Write down all that comes out of your pen. You have to be aware of the punctuation. Maybe you should not write down all that comes out of your pen. Write or swim when you are drunk. You do not notice how cold it is. Maybe you should be drunk. What would Jesus do? Chapter 1, verse 3. Jesus would apply the cream to the infected areas only. Jesus would decide upon a dachshund instead of a golden retriever. The golden retriever would be sold to a couple that planned to relocate to Provincetown, Massachusetts. Jesus would pass through Provincetown, Massachusetts, but he wouldn't want to live there. All of the streets have the appropriate turns. They never seem to get you there. Jesus would search the classifieds for a good washer-dryer combination. History always finds a way to turn into not history. Christopher Parks. My favorite bullet. Currency through my hands. Into the service station to get gas and someone drives up in a beater saying he needs money to fix the car. A raised index finger delays the transaction. I hand out a bottle found in the back seat. The man, cheated, pops his hood to continue the deal to the bitter end. He is the kind of skinny that comes in stages. This young, pale girl of a boy emerges from the passenger side. A transvestite hooker eyeing customers, she offers herself to a blue pickup. The cab of the truck is alive with haggling. A moment later, when she reveals the goods, the hooker topples from the passenger side and kicks the ride as it pulls away. Rage flies out in a gift of tongues. The truck adds distance along with the shame, reverence disillusioned with the discrepancies between illusion and the scheme. A man in his 50s stumbles up and unzips a pouch filled with needles. Small bottles of insulin flash omniscient to the sun. He tells me of illness and a need for cash. I kneel again and emerge with over $1.20 in returnable bottles that I offer up. I continue to pump my fuel while consternation is born again to the satisfaction of compromise. This trinity of commerce helped along their way, and not a single bit of currency through my hands. Ron Allen established himself locally as a poet, despite there being no point in such a stature where the city of Detroit is concerned. Zero literary integrity here. The occasional article in a metro shitrag back when those were relevant. Tone-deaf events lamentably attended. A huddling group of post-beat, zen-brained fake artist flakes and mediocre singers. Insular ego party of the hapless. The decay extended to its lack of language. The theory-driven, briefly 70s math bath of the L equals A equals language school being chokably, academically prominent, deconstructed in their fugue, haunted by an undersized, understocked, half-a-magazine appropriately titled Dispatch, ran by some bitch from a hippie version of the Home Shopping Network, who along with her boomer cohorts stood proudly for censorship, also a Xerox of an anthology wisely entitled Abandoned Automobile. Detroit brought nothing and will always. Perhaps an imbecilic medley of slam stars, competing for bling, impotent rage against the page, like jelly smeared on a bongo, one dumb conglomeration of big-boned fuckwits, Midwest suckfest, worst scene allowed to go live, fat termites in a fallen house. Yet I can't think of one better, coast to coast, all led by a goat-chinned geriatric beatnik casualty, hopefully long dead, the worst jazzy cartoon refuse of beat fashion, a movement that sported less than 5 quality writers, the good ones being so good the detriment of their fallout fucked generations, alongside a Nike commercial's worth of academe and more moronic American Buddhism, holding hands with Bukowski to dumb down literature forever. Despite this shit, despite his surroundings, Ron Allen had talent. He was a genius playwright and an okay poet, and so, of course, the poetry is what people latched on to, though there was the superbly titled Neon Jawbone Riot. The plays remain buried by his family or some such common entanglement. This is why, likewise, with my aforementioned acquaintance, save your unfinished work to a trusty party who can read. Every writer to his suicide pact press release. Ron Allen's workshop, Horizons in Poetry, as partially effective as any other workshop, nice to discuss a shared interest, taught me, at least, about Aimé Césaire and his handful of excellent poems done before he morphed into a politician, translated with some competence by the squat, power-mongering, mansion-dwelling, candy-sucking toad Clayton Eshelman, who, like far too many poets, unlike our previous heroes, lived past due into a sadistically endless dotage. The only positive public art space to emerge from this meager slum was housed at the Zeitgeist. They exclusively staged absurdist plays with a literary bent, a Detroit first and last, for the most part, featuring the Eberact Company, who went on to switch locations, including an apartment ghetto lobby with bass blasts, adding wonderfully to the dread of a Harold Pinter play, catharsis through movement and sound indeed. Ron Allen's great plays went before the lights, The Last Church of the 20th Century, Aboriginal Treatment Center, Wham! Death Agent of the Experimental Real, an elliptical look at abject desire, the Relative Energy Sack Theory Museum, and Entertainer Zero Machine, which I saw at the Hastings Street Ballroom. Naked players hovering inside cages on stilts shouted sublime lines, as if to warn us in their phenomenal scarcity of things to come. namely nothing more of phenomenal scarcities. Ron Allen's work would be put on or published for all the wrong reasons now, if it ever will be again. A resounding zilch, locally and universally proceeds. Anything or anyone of note, omitted by mandate. Ron Allen, Untitled. Kiss me full as weapons, kiss me full as weapons, kiss as weapon full of me, kiss raw vinegar, my song, the ripple-bent weapon of God, kiss my saint of ripe pity, kiss the leftover rind of me, kiss me like teeth cob relish, like meek candle-lit stone, kiss raw food of timid throats, the funk of cheated death, kiss like frank word up, like rollin' jasmine smoke, like groove in makeshift finger snap, like chillin' wind song, like the reach of cannon break, like the saying battle, like vicarious blood, nocturne weapon of tightness, like rim of jointed sea, kiss returning sculpture of woman, kiss me full of ejaculated ruins of Kemet, like war in your tongue, shock me as teeth, rip me weapon, scream blush blue, scream me out heretic win, laugh rude rope of joy, kiss me like blankets of tar, hold me as silk, remnant of you. Assorted lines from Neon Jawbone Riot. The unborn muse of shadows. I shout hell from God's groin. I knew as I hung like a child braying, I knew as I hung inside the sun. Pimp chain radiator. Kismet. I am the tongue speaking acerbic atoms, mesmerized by the skin of reptiles, seeking the smell of hallucinogenics. The aura of my brain on fire, my bone is quicker than my eye, smiling under the dung of Haiti.